Welcome to the heart of North America, to the shores of the Great Lakes, a region steeped not only in recent colonial history, but in an immeasurable deep time that continues to whisper secrets from beneath the shifting sands and frigid waters. We're diving deep into Michigan's unsolved ancient mysteries, anomalies so profound that they challenge the established timelines of human habitation and technological prowess in the Americas. Prepare yourself, because the conventional narrative of what happened here thousands of years ago is about to be dramatically unsettled. For centuries, the story of Michigan's past was relatively straightforward: indigenous peoples adapting to the glacial retreat, followed by European exploration and settlement. Yet scattered across the upper and lower peninsulas and, most intriguingly, submerged within the vastness of the Great Lakes themselves, are archaeological and geological enigmas that refuse to fit neatly into this textbook account. These aren't just minor footnotes. They are potential evidence of sophisticated cultures, monumental construction, and interactions with megafauna that simply are not supposed to exist according to accepted chronology. Mainstream science often defaults to skepticism, offering explanations that range from natural phenomena to outright hoaxes. But the persistence of these mysteries and the questions they raise demands a closer, more impartial look. The sheer scale of the landscape and the forces that shaped it, massive glaciers, colossal lake levels, and the relentless march of geological time, provide both the context for these discoveries and the perfect mechanism for obscuring the truth. The waters of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, acting as a natural time capsule, hold the most compelling and least understood evidence, forcing us to consider a world long before the first recorded histories. Our journey begins with the staggering yet often overlooked fact of the Paleo-Indian landscape. When the glaciers receded, they didn't just leave behind lakes. They left behind a terrain where lake levels were dramatically different, sometimes hundreds of feet lower than today. This exposed vast areas of land, corridors, and high-ground islands where early nomadic peoples could hunt and settle. It is within this sunken prehistoric landscape that the most significant challenges to accepted science lie. Specifically, we must focus on the incredible evidence of a sophisticated caribou hunting complex that was discovered in the Alpena Aberley Ridge, a now submerged feature that once connected the northeast corner of Michigan to the province of Ontario. This ridge, currently under approximately 120 feet of water, was once a dry land bridge used by migrating caribou and, crucially, by the Paleo-Indian hunters who stalked them. In 2008, a team from the University of Michigan, using specialized sonar and remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, discovered an elaborate system of stone features along this ridge. These weren't just random boulders. They were intentionally placed stone lanes, drive walls, and V-shaped hunting blinds, structures clearly designed to funnel massive caribou herds toward concealed hunters. The carbon dating of wood charcoal found at one of the associated hunting blinds yielded a staggering age, over 9,000 years old. This pushes the timeline of organized, large-scale hunting and construction in the region deep into the Paleo-Indian era. While science confirms the existence of the hunters and the dating of the charcoal, the mystery deepens when we consider the complexity of the construction. These structures required an understanding of animal migration, coordinated labor, and a long-term plan. Challenging the simplistic portrayal of these early Americans as purely transient, opportunistic hunter-gatherers, the scale of the V formation is immense, suggesting not just a small hunting party, but a community-wide effort with a detailed knowledge of both the environment and engineering. How did they achieve this precise placement in a harsh post-glacial landscape, and why is this level of organization not better reflected in the terrestrial archaeological record? The answer is perhaps simple. The evidence is mostly underwater, hidden from traditional excavation. The mystery isn't if they built it, but why we were so surprised to find structures of this sophistication dating back to the 8th millennium BC. Adding to this enigma is the phenomenon of the sleeping giants, the massive, unmovable copper deposits scattered across the Upper Peninsula, particularly on the Keweenaw Peninsula and Isle Royale. Michigan is home to the world's largest and purest deposits of native copper, metal that exists in a pure, unalloyed state requiring no smelting. This resource was exploited by what is now called the Old Copper Culture as far back as 7,000 years ago, making it one of the earliest examples of sustained metalworking in the world, predating the Bronze Age in the Near East by millennium. The scientific community acknowledges that these people extracted, hammered, and shaped copper into tools, weapons, and ornaments. The unsolved mystery lies not in the existence of the copper miners, but in the scale of the mining operations and the fate of the extracted copper. Archaeological estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of tons, some experts say up to 1.5 billion pounds of copper were extracted from thousands of ancient pits over the course of millennia. The level of industrial effort required to extract this amount of metal using only stone hammers and fire-assisted fracturing is staggering and difficult for modern science to fully reconcile. If this colossal amount of copper was extracted, where did it go? Very little of it is found in known archaeological sites in North America. While trade networks certainly existed, the vast majority of the mined copper cannot be accounted for locally. This raises a profound and still unanswered question. Did a vast transcontinental or even transoceanic trade network exist capable of moving hundreds of thousands of tons of metal to distant civilizations that may have been contemporary with the early phases of Egyptian or Mesopotamian history? Some fringe theories, dismissed by mainstream science, propose connections to European or even Mediterranean Bronze Age cultures, fueled by the sheer volume of missing copper. While the established scientific consensus points to internal North American consumption and trade that is simply underrepresented in the current archaeological record, the sheer disparity between the estimated extraction rate and the artifacts recovered remains a compelling and truly unsolved ancient riddle of scale and destiny. The silent, massive copper pit of the sleeping giants, monuments to a lost industry, daring us to explain the impossible physics of the massive, unrecorded metal trade.
Our deep dive into Michigan's hidden history now turns its focus to the single most compelling and often cited piece of evidence challenging established timelines: the alleged Michigan Stonehenge, found submerged beneath the chilling, clear waters of Grand Traverse Bay in Lake Michigan. This discovery, made in 2007 by underwater archaeologist Dr. Mark Hawley and his team from the Grand Traverse Bay Underwater Preserve, wasn't the result of a targeted search for megalithic structures. Rather, they were performing a sonar survey to map out old shipwrecks when their instruments pick up an anomaly that initially baffled them: a mile-long stretch of stone boulders arranged in a discernible line, appearing too regular and deliberate to be a natural glacial deposit. This site, now protected and kept confidential to prevent looting and damage, has become a focal point of debate, splitting the scientific community between those who see an undeniable human artifact and those who mandate extreme caution before rewriting history. The stones themselves are massive, some weighing several tons, and appear to have been set on the floor of the bay, roughly 40 feet below the current surface. The linear alignment, according to Hawley's initial observations and subsequent acoustic mapping, strongly suggests an intentional arrangement, perhaps serving as a ceremonial site, an astronomical calendar, or even an ancient boundary marker. However, the true shock lay in the most significant artifact discovered among the stones: a single, large boulder featuring a distinct carving that appears to be a mastodon. This detail is the linchpin of the mystery, for it ties the man-made alignment not just to ancient peoples, but to a specific and very deep point in time. Mastodons, cousins to the mammoth, roamed this region but went extinct approximately 10,000 to 11,000 years ago, near the end of the Pleistocene epoch. If the carving is genuine, and if it is contemporaneous with the arrangement of the stones, then this submerged structure would dramatically predate not only the famous Stonehenge in England, which is roughly 5,000 years old, but also the establishment of complex agricultural societies in the Near East. It would be among the oldest known examples of monumental human construction anywhere in the world, pushing back the date of sophisticated cultural expression in North America by at least 5,000 years. The scientific resistance to accepting the Michigan Stonehenge at face value is rooted in the high stakes of the claim. To validate a 10,000-year-old megalithic site requires an unimpeachable level of evidence, including definitive dating of the stones themselves, confirmation that the mastodon carving is truly ancient and not a modern forgery, a challenge since it remains underwater, and geological proof that the arrangement could not have been created by natural forces like glacial scouring or ice rafting. Skeptics argue that while the alignment is intriguing, the massive retreating glaciers that shaped Michigan left behind vast fields of stones, erratics that were often pushed, piled, and sometimes aligned in ways that mimicked human intervention. Furthermore, the difficulty and expense of prolonged underwater excavation and analysis have meant that a definitive consensus-building study has yet to be completed. The scientific process correctly demands rigorous peer review and replicable evidence, and until the carving can be properly extracted, analyzed, and dated by multiple independent experts, the mystery remains categorized as an unproven anomaly. Yet the sheer coincidence of a linear arrangement coupled with a carving of an extinct megafauna in a region known to have been dry land during the Mastodon era presents a probabilistic challenge that keeps the mystery alive and compelling. Connecting this site back to the previous discussion of the Alpina Amberley Ridge provides a powerful, if circumstantial, convergence of evidence. Both the submerged Caribou drive lanes on the ridge and the Michigan Stonehenge and Grand Traverse Bay sit in a landscape that was dry land up until roughly 9,000 years ago, when the immense glacial lake Algonquin drained and the water levels of the subsequent Great Lake systems rose. The hunting structures on the ridge, confirmed to be around 9,000 years old, prove that early Paleo-Indians were building large, intentional stone structures on the now submerged lake bed. It is entirely plausible, therefore, that if they could build sophisticated hunting lanes, they could also build a ceremonial or calendar stone alignment. The Stonehenge site is roughly contemporaneous with the hunting lanes and offers a glimpse into the cosmological and spiritual lives of these early Americans. Were they simply nomadic hunters, or did they possess a complex understanding of the stars, seasons, and the environment that required fixed monumental markers? The placement of the stones could indicate a primitive alignment with the solstices or equinoxes, a characteristic common to many later megalithic cultures around the world. The science hasn't explained this. It has simply cataloged the discovery and paused, waiting for the resources and political will to definitively investigate a site that could completely overturn the established narrative of North American prehistory. Moreover, the mastodon carving presents an intriguing intellectual puzzle. If the carving is a mastodon, it indicates that the people who created it were contemporaneous, or at least had a profound cultural memory of these massive creatures. The act of carving such an image into a permanent structure suggests a relationship between the people and the megafauna that goes beyond simple subsistence hunting. It implies symbolism, reverence, or even totemism. The technology required to make a clean, identifiable carving in hard rock using only the tools available 10,000 years ago is a testament to the skill of these Paleo-Indians. Science struggles to fully model the social structure and cultural complexity of these early hunter-gatherers, often projecting a rudimentary lifestyle. The Michigan Stonehenge is a silent, submerged challenge to this model, demanding that we acknowledge the possibility of early North American societies capable of advanced abstract thought, monumental construction, and deep cultural memory. Until the carving is definitively proven to be a fake or the arrangement a natural fluke, a truly massive and unlikely natural fluke, the mystery persists, representing a window into a lost world where mastodons and megalithic builders walk the dry landscape of the present-day Lake Michigan floor. It forces us to ask, what other sophisticated structures and untold stories lie beneath the millions of gallons of water preserved by the very forces that erase their creators from the surface record? The deep waters of the Great Lakes guard the secrets of the true deep time of Michigan.
If the submerged megaliths of Grand Traverse Bay represent a genuine, if unproven, ancient mystery, then our next subject, the Michigan relics, stands as a textbook example of a man-made historical enigma that captivated the public and severely damaged the credibility of early Michigan archaeology. This story is crucial to understanding the landscape of ancient mysteries in the state because it highlights the enduring human desire to find exotic, complex origins for North American civilization and the scientific necessity for rigorous authentication. The relics, also known as the Michigan Copper Puzzle or the Soper-Savage Collection, refer to a massive collection of thousands of artifacts, allegedly unearthed from ancient burial mounds and Native American sites across Michigan, particularly in the Lansing area, between the 1870s and 1920s. The sheer volume and bizarre nature of these objects are what initially stunned and intrigued people. The collection included inscribed tablets made of slate and clay, copper tools, smoking pipes, and ceramic vessels, all bearing strange mixed symbols. The inscriptions were the most provocative element, featuring characters that proponents claimed represented ancient Hebrew, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and even Chaldean script, often combined with crude depictions of biblical scenes, crosses, and other Christian iconography. The promoters of these artifacts, most notably the primary discoverer James Scotford and later Daniel Soper, Michigan's former Secretary of State, presented them as definitive proof that early Christians, peoples from the Near East, or even the lost tribes of Israel had established sophisticated settlements in North America thousands of years ago, long before any historically recorded contact. This narrative offered a romantic and sensational alternative to the established history of indigenous habitation and fit neatly into the religious and cultural biases of the time, quickly gaining a substantial following among those eager to challenge the established scientific consensus. However, the scientific community, from the very beginning, treated the Michigan relics with extreme skepticism, bordering on outright dismissal. Institutions like the Smithsonian Institution and prominent archaeologists of the era, including renowned expert Frederick Starr, quickly pointed out massive inconsistencies and red flags that modern forensic archaeology now confirms. The evidence against the authenticity of the relics is overwhelming and multifaceted. Firstly, the inscriptions themselves are nonsensical. They do not follow the grammatical or linguistic rules of any single known ancient language. They are a clumsy amalgamation of different scripts, often poorly drawn, and mix the symbols that appear to be derived from contemporary Masonic or popular occult literature, suggesting a contemporary rather than ancient origin. Secondly, the method of discovery was highly suspect. Scotford, the chief proponent, and his associates always seemed to find the artifacts under circumstances where independent witnesses were either absent or only present after the fact. The artifacts were also found in locations that had been thoroughly investigated by legitimate archaeologists who had found no such evidence. The consistent pattern of suspicious discoveries strongly pointed toward a carefully managed distribution of faked items. Perhaps the most damning evidence against the relics is the physical state and composition of the artifacts. The clay of the slate tablets, often allegedly hundreds or thousands of years old, showed no signs of appropriate aging. They were poorly fired, in the case of the clay objects, or etched with tools that left telltale modern marks. Scientific analysis revealed that the materials were sourced locally and that the copper objects were often worked in a manner inconsistent with known ancient copper technologies of the region. The artifacts often appeared too clean, too sharp, and too pristine to have been buried in the ground for centuries.
The final nail in the coffin came when James Scotford's wife, after separating from him, confessed that he was creating the artifacts in their home. Later, a local craftsman confessed to making some of the copper pieces and even detailed the simple tools and methods used for the forgery. The entire elaborate narrative was systematically dismantled, revealing a complex, decades-long deception driven by personal profit and sensationalism. The Michigan relics, while proven to be a hoax, are important because they serve as a critical cautionary tale when investigating genuine ancient mysteries in Michigan, such as the submerged megaliths or the vast copper mining pits. The existence of a major, well-publicized forgery forces scientists to apply an even more stringent level of scrutiny to every unusual find, sometimes leading to the premature dismissal of potentially legitimate anomalies. The lasting effect of the hoax was a cloud of discredit cast in all Michigan archaeology, making it harder for genuine researchers to gain funding or credibility for investigating truly puzzling findings. Despite the conclusive evidence of forgery, a small, persistent group of enthusiasts and pseudo-historians continues to champion the relics of genuine, alleging a grand conspiracy by the Smithsonian and mainstream academia to suppress evidence that contradicts established historical timelines. This enduring belief, the scientifically unfounded, contributes to the narrative of unsolved mysteries in the popular imagination. In essence, the scientists explained the Michigan relics. They're a collection of forgeries. But the mystery remains is one of human behavior. How could such a large-scale, years-long deception be maintained, and why does the belief in their authenticity continue to resonate with a small but dedicated audience? It underscores the psychological attraction of history that is grander, more exotic, and more complex than the accepted narrative. The relics are a scar on the historical landscape of Michigan, a reminder that while the earth holds true secrets, the hands of men can sometimes create more compelling, though ultimately false ones.
We now return to one of Michigan's most enduring and scientifically acknowledged ancient enigmas, the massive ancient copper mining complex centered around the Keweenaw Peninsula in the Upper Peninsula and extending to Isle Royale. Unlike the Michigan relics, the existence of these ancient mines is undeniable fact, confirmed through extensive archaeological and geological study. This is not a hoax. This is evidence of an incredible, sophisticated, and sustained industrial effort that lasted for millennia. What is truly baffling, and what science cannot fully explain, is the sheer magnitude of the extraction and the subsequent disappearance of the extracted metal. The story of the old copper culture, which spans from approximately 7000 BC to 1000 BC, represents one of the earliest and longest-lasting metalworking traditions in the world, predating the rise of significant metal use in many parts of the Old World. The geography of this mystery is critical. The Keweenaw Peninsula is unique because it is one of the few places on Earth where native copper that is chemically pure and exists in large solid masses, can be found near the surface. The ancient miners did not need to smelt ore. They simply hammered, chipped, and lifted the pure metal. Archaeologists have documented thousands of ancient mining pits, some reaching depths of 20 to 30 feet, often found beneath centuries of accumulated forest debris. These pits, often lined with rubble, show evidence of a sophisticated, if rudimentary, mining technique, heating the rock face with fire and then rapidly cooling it with water to fracture the brittle quartz and expose the tougher copper. The work was monumental, involving armies of laborers using nothing more than heavy hammerstones, some weighing over 40 pounds, often grooved to hold the wooden handle. The number of discarded hammerstones found at these sites is staggering, indicating continuous, large-scale operation for thousands of years. The true scientific riddle is the quantitative estimate of the copper extracted. While precise figures are difficult to obtain, conservative estimates from geological surveys and archaeological assessments suggest that the total amount of native copper mined over the Old Culture period runs into the hundreds of thousands of tons. Some estimates are dramatically higher, reaching up to 1.5 billion pounds, depending on how one extrapolates the yield from the surveyed pits. Even taking the most conservative figures, the amount of copper extracted is enormous,
far exceeding the volume of copper artifacts found in all known archaeological sites across North America. This quantitative disparity leads to the central, unsolved mystery. Where did the metal go? Science struggles to reconcile the immense scale of the mining operation with the meager archaeological recovery. If hundreds of thousands of tons of metal were mined, only a minuscule fraction, a few thousand pounds, has been recovered in the form of arrowheads, spears, knives, and ornaments in North America. This absence fuels two major competing theories, neither of which fully satisfies the scale of the operation. The first and most academically accepted theory suggests that the copper was indeed distributed extensively across North America via sophisticated, long-distance indigenous trade networks, such as the Hopewell and Mississippian cultures. Proponents argue that the copper was constantly being reshaped, reused, or buried in sites that have yet to be discovered or excavated, and that over the course of thousands of years, the copper that wasn't consumed simply disintegrated or was recycled. They also argued that earlier estimates of extraction might be exaggerated. But even accounting for erosion and non-discoveries, the gap between the amount extracted and the amount recovered remains enormous, a statistical anomaly that is hard to dismiss purely through archaeological omission. The second, highly controversial theory, which mainstream science largely rejects but cannot definitively disprove with current evidence, posits the involvement of transoceanic trade during the old copper culture's long tenure. This theory suggests that the massive surplus quantities of high-purity Michigan copper were exported overseas to supply the burgeoning Bronze Age cultures of Europe, the Mediterranean, or even beyond, who were in constant need of copper to create bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Proponents of this theory point to vague cultural similarities, unusual markings on some copper masses, and historical accounts of anomalous European artifacts. While this theory lacks hard proof, no ancient Mediterranean ships loaded with Q&A copper have been found, the sheer volume of missing metal acts as a powerful statistical driver for speculation. The current scientific framework cannot explain the economics and logistics of mining such a massive surplus for what appears to be limited local consumption. Ultimately, the ancient copper mines of Michigan are a monument to a lost industrial civilization that operated for millennia without leaving a clear account of its products. Science has explained the how of the mining, using fire, water, and stone hammers, but is thoroughly baffled by the why and the where. Was it simply a massive, continuous supply chain for internal North American groups whose artifact record is frustratingly incomplete? Or does the mystery of the missing copper challenge the fundamental isolationist model of pre-Columbian contact, suggesting a scale of global interaction that is yet to be acknowledged? The immense, silent, hand-dug pits remain the most concrete, yet most puzzling relics of Michigan's true ancient past.
Our exploration of Michigan's anomalies takes us from the deep waters of the Great Lakes and the ancient mines to the geological formations on land, where science often struggles to definitively separate the hand of man from the forces of nature. Michigan's landscape is a masterclass in glacial sculpting. Massive ice sheets retreating over millennia left behind vast deposits of till, sculpted drumlins, and scattered erratics, boulders dropped far from their original source rock. Yet, within this chaos of natural formations, specific sites present structural anomalies that strongly suggest deliberate, large-scale construction, creating a category of mysteries that we can term geological enigmas. One of the most debated and persistent examples involves the claims of ancient stone walls and foundations found in various parts of Michigan, most notably in the Upper Peninsula and along the Lake Superior shore. These are often massive alignments of boulders that appear to be stacked, fitted, or placed in patterns that defy simple natural explanation. For example, some formations show what appeared to be coursed masonry, large, heavy stones seemingly laid one on top of the other in long, linear patterns, sometimes running for hundreds of feet. Proponents of their ancient human origin argue that these represent the remnants of pre-contact fortifications, boundaries, or even the foundations of forgotten megastructures, possibly related to the old copper culture, given their proximity to mining regions.
The stones are often weathered to the point where they blend seamlessly with the natural landscape, making carbon dating or other direct dating methods nearly impossible, as they are not associated with organic material. The scientific challenge here is the confirmation bias of geology. Glaciers are immensely powerful and can create features that mimic human design. Ice rafting, the process where massive ice floes pick up rocks, move them, and then deposit them as the ice melts, can leave rocks aligned in linear or curved patterns. Periglacial action involving the repeated freezing and thawing of soil and water can also cause stones to migrate and settle into patterns that appear intentional. Geologists, viewing these formations through the lens of known natural processes, often conclude that the alignments are the result of these powerful geological forces. However, in specific instances, the regularity and precision of the alignment, such as stones that appear to be deliberately propped up or interlocked, make the natural explanation feel less compelling. Where is the definitive empirical line between a naturally deposited ice-scoured alignment and a human-constructed wall built from locally available field stones? Science has struggled to establish an unambiguous set of criteria, leaving these sites in a perpetual state of ambiguity. Another significant geological enigma is the claim of pavement or floor stones discovered in some areas. These are large, flat stones that are alleged to have been purposely cut and laid to form pathways or extensive floor surfaces. These claims often arise in areas that were historically prone to flooding or where stable ground was necessary for habitation or ceremonial use. If proven, these would represent an advanced engineering capability. The skepticism from the scientific community is rooted in the commonality of shale and slate deposits in Michigan, which naturally fracture into large, relatively flat plates. When layers of sedimentary rock erode, they can expose surfaces that appear deceptively like pavement. Yet the question remains, if a formation shows clear evidence of tool marks, which are difficult to confirm after millennia of weathering, or specific non-random orientation, how quickly should the natural explanation be discarded? The lack of associated artifacts or dated organic material prevents these claims from moving from the realm of geological curiosity into established archaeology. The mystery deepens when these supposed structures are linked to the extensive network of ancient foot trails and portage routes known to have been used by indigenous peoples for millennia. It is plausible that early inhabitants utilized enhanced or adapted naturally occurring stone alignments for their extensive transportation and trade networks, particularly those connecting the copper region to other parts of the continent. If a linear glacial deposit offered a natural, slightly raised path through swampy ground, a community might logically enhance it by clearing debris or stacking boundary stones. In this scenario, the structure is partially natural and partially human-modified, blurring the line of distinction. Science hasn't fully investigated the extent to which these early cultures performed geoengineering, massive projects designed to manage the landscape for hunting, travel, and settlement, simply because the evidence is literally disguised as natural terrain. Ultimately, these geological enigmas represent the frontier where archaeology meets geomorphology. They are challenging because they lack the smoking gun of a clearly non-natural material like a dated piece of pottery or a metal tool. Instead, we're left with subtle clues in the arrangement of the Earth's raw materials. To definitively explain these anomalies, science requires funding for extensive, long-term excavation, ground-penetrating radar or GPR surveys, and specialized weathering analysis, resources that are often prioritized for sites with clearer indicators of human occupation. Until that level of intensive analysis occurs, the possibility remains that Michigan's forests and fields conceal the heavily eroded remnants of forgotten large-scale constructions left by a people whose engineering prowess we have yet to fully appreciate. They are the sleeping giants of the land, just as the megaliths are the sleeping giants of the water.
Beyond the massive stone structures and buried copper, Michigan offers a more intimate class of ancient mystery: the cryptic rock art and the astronomical alignments found in specific locations. These finds are not about industrial scale, but about the intellectual and spiritual sophistication of the region's ancient inhabitants, suggesting a deep connection to the cosmos and a symbolic language we are only beginning to decipher. While not as numerous or visually spectacular as the vast petroglyph sites in the American Southwest, the few known rock carvings in Michigan are equally perplexing to science, primarily due to their ambiguous dating and uncertain meaning. The most significant and publicly accessible example is the Sanilac Petroglyphs Historic State Park in the Lower Peninsula, home to the largest collection of rock carvings in Michigan. The carvings, etched into a sandstone outcropping, depict a range of imagery: human figures, animal tracks, including deer and elk, mythological creatures, bows and arrows, and what are clearly complex symbols and geometric designs. These carvings are generally attributed to the late woodland period, likely created by ancestors of the modern-day Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi people, possibly around 300 to 1,000 years ago. However, the precise dating is challenging because sandstone weathers relatively quickly, and the only dating method relies on associated archaeological layers, which are often disturbed or inconclusive. This leaves a wide, ambiguous window of time, meaning some carvings could potentially be much older, perhaps linking them to earlier cultures. The unsolved mystery of the petroglyphs is primarily semiotic. What do they mean? While some images are clearly representational, like the animal tracks, others are highly abstract. One prominent carving depicts an archaic human figure with horns, often interpreted as a spiritual entity or powerful shaman. Another shows a large bird-like figure, potentially an early representation of the thunderbird. While contemporary Native American traditions offer strong interpretive frameworks, the lack of a direct, documented translation from the time of their creation means that their original purpose, were they records of dreams, spiritual guides for hunting, territorial markers, or cosmological narratives, remains speculative. Science can document the images and analyze the rock type, but it cannot conclusively unlock the cultural keys to their meaning, leaving a powerful silent narrative inaccessible to us. Furthermore, some of the geometrical patterns and arrangements at sites like Sanilac and other lesser-known rock outcrops have sparked debates regarding archaeoastronomy. Archaeoastronomy is the study of how people in the past understood and used phenomena in the sky. Researchers have posited that certain carved lines, dots, or aligned features at the petroglyph sites could have been used to mark the movements of the sun, particularly the solstices or equinoxes. If true, this indicates that the ancient inhabitants possessed a sophisticated, practical knowledge of celestial mechanics and integrated it into their sacred sites. This is not unusual for ancient cultures globally, but in Michigan, evidence is sparse. The scientific challenge lies in the difference between coincidence and intention. Many lines and shadows are naturally cast by the landscape. To prove intentional astronomical alignment, one needs consistent evidence across multiple sites and a clear correlation that holds year after year. While some promising correlations have been noted, the current scientific consensus is that definitive proof of a large-scale coordinated astronomical calendar system in ancient Michigan is still lacking, leaving the solar alignment theories in the realm of intriguing hypotheses. The concept of pre-contact literacy or advanced symbolism is also raised by these carvings. While the patterns are clearly not a phonetic alphabet like those found in Europe, they represent a highly developed system of graphic communication. They convey complex ideas, spiritual beliefs, and practical information efficiently. Understanding the rules and grammar of this visual language is key to unlocking the full intellectual history of the region.
The difficulty for science is that it requires not just archaeological expertise, but deep collaboration with indigenous knowledge keepers, a relationship that has often been strained or neglected in the past. This intersection of scientific analysis and cultural interpretation is where the true mystery resides. How do we fully integrate the empirical observations of geology and carving technique with the spiritual and cultural context of the original creators? The science of the petroglyphs is incomplete without the philosophy behind them. In essence, the cryptic petroglyphs are time capsules of thought. They are physical records of ancient Michiganders looking up at the sky and wrestling with the profound questions of existence, migration, and power. Science can date the context and map the forms, but the linguistic and cosmological riddle within the sandstone remains stubbornly unsolved, challenging us to look beyond mere artifact and appreciate the depth of ancient North American intellectual life. They are a profound reminder that the history of Michigan is written not only in copper and stone walls, but in abstract symbols waiting to be read.
Moving our focus from stone to earth, we encounter another category of Michigan's ancient mysteries, the effigy birthworks and burial mounds that dot the landscape, particularly in the southern half of the Lower Peninsula. While mound building is a recognized and well-studied practice across North America, dating back thousands of years, notably the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian cultures, certain formations in Michigan present anomalies concerning their age, function, and most perplexingly, their unusual animal shapes, often referred to as effigy mounds. These earthworks are not just piles of dirt, they are monumental sculptures that require extensive labor and a detailed understanding of geometry and landscape design. The tradition of mound building in Michigan is primarily associated with the late woodland period, roughly 400 AD to European contact, where conical or linear mounds were typically used for burial or ceremonial purposes. However, the presence of serpent mounds, bird effigies, and other complex geomorphic shapes has always been a point of contention. While neighboring states like Wisconsin are famous for their effigy mounds, Michigan has far fewer confirmed examples, and those that exist are often poorly preserved or ambiguously shaped, making scientific classification difficult. The primary mystery is the lack of clear cultural context for these effigy shapes within the standard Michigan archaeological record. Who built them, and what cosmological purpose did this specific animal or serpent shape serve? One of the most intriguing, though largely destroyed, sites was the series of mounds near Grand Rapids along the Grand River. Historical accounts and early surveys documented elaborate earthworks, some potentially depicting animal shapes, including a large serpentine form. The relentless pace of 19th and 20th century development, particularly agriculture and road building, led to the destruction of many of these features before they could be properly mapped or excavated using modern techniques. This destruction itself constitutes an unsolved historical mystery. What precisely was lost, and could the systematic destruction of these sites have erased definitive proof of a widespread effigy building culture in Michigan? Science is now left to rely on vague, often contradictory historical records and fragments of mounds that survived. The serpent mounds specifically present a challenge. The most famous North American example is the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, a massive, undeniably human-made effigy that has been linked to astronomical alignments. Finding a parallel large-scale serpent mound in Michigan would connect the state's ancient inhabitants to a broader, highly sophisticated ceremonial tradition. The few candidates in Michigan, however, are often dismissed by skeptical scientists as natural glacial features, specifically eskers, long winding ridges of sand and gravel left by melting glaciers, or natural levees along ancient waterways. Glacial geology can mimic intentional human construction, forming long, sinuous lines that, viewed from the ground, appear entirely natural, but when viewed from above or mapped with precision, sometimes suggest a deliberate shape. The unresolved question is, when did the natural feature become a ceremonial site? Did ancient peoples utilize and enhance natural serpentine ridges for their spiritual purposes?
The boundary is incredibly blurred, and without associated artifacts directly tied to the construction phase of the earthwork, science cannot confidently confirm intentional effigy construction in many disputed cases. Furthermore, the dating of the mounds presents a profound mystery. While most confirmed burial mounds in Michigan date to the late woodland period, some linear features near the copper-rich regions have been proposed by French researchers to be older, perhaps associated with the old copper culture itself. If true, this would push the date of monumental earth-moving back thousands of years. The established science argues that dating must come from reliable carbon samples within the mound fill. The problem is that many early mounds were reused or modified over millennia, leading to mixed dating results that confuse the true construction age. This ambiguity allows the mystery of their precise origin and purpose to persist. In summation, the mystery of the serpent mounds in effigy earthworks in Michigan is a scientific dilemma rooted in preservation, ambiguity, and cultural connection. Science acknowledges the mound-building tradition, but struggles to differentiate between naturally shaped earth and intentional effigies, and to definitively date the most controversial formations. They stand as silent testaments to a cosmological worldview that saw the landscape itself as a canvas for monumental spiritual expression. Until ground-penetrating radar and large-scale control excavations can separate the intentional shape from the natural formation, these impressive features remain unclassified and unsolved, hinting at a forgotten chapter of Michigan's ancient spiritual history.
Our deep dive into Michigan's ancient mysteries now shifts from monumental constructions and artifacts to the fundamental question of subsistence and diet, the riddle of ancient agriculture, and the potential for lost or unexpectedly early domesticated crops. The standard scientific narrative holds that sustained, intensive agriculture, the kind that supported large fixed settlements, arrived relatively late in Michigan, primarily with the introduction of the Three Sisters, maize, beans, and squash complex during the late woodland period, roughly after 800 AD. Before that, the story is largely one of sophisticated hunting, fishing, and gathering, expertly utilizing the abundant resources of the Great Lakes and the vast forests. However, certain archaeological findings suggest that the agricultural picture might be far older, more varied, and more complex than currently accepted, raising questions that science cannot definitively resolve. The first major challenge to the timeline involves the presence of early domesticated grains and plants. While maize is typically dated late, evidence suggests that early inhabitants may have been domesticating or managing local plants far earlier. This includes the cultivation of sunflower, sumpweed, Iva annua, and goosefoot, Chenopodum, which form part of the Eastern Agricultural Complex, or EAC. In parts of Michigan, archaeobotanical finds have pushed the dates for the management and use of these local domesticates back, showing that ancient communities were not merely gathering, they were actively selecting and planting specific species to ensure stable food supplies. The mystery here is one of recognition and scope. How far back does this domesticating knowledge go, and how widespread was it? Because these local crops often look similar to their wild relatives, science struggles to unequivocally identify the earliest domesticated forms, leading to an underestimation of early agricultural sophistication. If complex plant management was practiced for millennia, it supports the idea that the ancient populations were settled enough and organized enough to perform large-scale projects, such as the submerged hunting lanes and the massive copper mines. A more controversial puzzle involves the potential for lost or forgotten crops that may have thrived in the unique microclimates of the Great Lakes region. Michigan's climate is tempered by the lakes, creating ideal conditions for certain types of specialized horticulture. Researchers have occasionally encountered anomalies, such as unusually large seeds or pollen samples, that do not neatly fit known botanical classifications, leading to speculation about plants
that may have been cultivated but ultimately failed to survive into the historical record, or were replaced by more productive staples like maize. The scientific task of identifying and classifying extinct cultivated species is immensely difficult, relying on fragmentary evidence and comparison with living relatives. This unknown botanical history suggests that the ancient Michiganders may have had a deeper, more intimate knowledge of their local flora and a capacity for genetic manipulation that is currently uncredited by standard archaeological models. The greatest anomaly in this field comes from the occasional reports of pre-Columbian wheat or barley, crops native to the Old World, allegedly found in deeply buried archaeological layers in Michigan. These highly contentious claims, often linked to the discredited Michigan relics hoax, which included inscriptions suggesting Near Eastern contact, are virtually unanimously rejected by mainstream science. The overwhelming evidence points to contamination, misidentification of wild grasses, or outright fabrication, especially given the lack of any associated artifacts or genetic markers that would support an early transoceanic introduction. However, the persistence of these claims, even in isolated, non-hoax-related contexts, highlights the scientific need for absolute rigor. Every unusual seed or grain discovered must be subjected to modern DNA analysis and rigorous carbon dating. Until such analysis conclusively rules out every unusual botanical finding, the question, however small and remote the possibility, of unexpected pre-Columbian food sources remains a scientific challenge to the isolationist paradigm. Ultimately, the mystery of ancient agriculture in Michigan is not about a total absence of farming, but about the unexplained sophistication and potential antiquity of the local food systems. Science confirms the EAC plants were used, but cannot fully map the extent of genetic and systematic control these ancient populations exerted over their environment. The ability to sustain complex cultures like the old copper miners or the builders of the submerged drive lanes suggests a very stable, efficient, and potentially intensive food supply that goes beyond the standard hunter-gatherer model. Were they practicing a form of forest gardening or permaculture that left few obvious archaeological traces, making them seem less agriculturally advanced than they were? The current scientific record gives us only the major staples, leaving the finer details of the daily diet and the ingenious local agricultural practices of Michigan's ancient peoples as an enduring, unsolved riddle.
As we near the conclusion of our survey of Michigan's ancient mysteries, we turn our attention to the deepest stratum of human history, the Paleo-Indian era, a period spanning from the first human entry into the region around 13,000 years ago until the end of the last ice age. Now, while this period is characterized by highly distinctive and skillfully crafted stone tools like the iconic fluted projectile points, Clovis and Folsom, certain specific artifacts and sites in Michigan challenge the established timelines and accepted routes of early human migration. These are the cryptic remnants of the state's very first inhabitants, the evidence that science struggles to definitively place in the standard archaeological framework. The traditional scientific model dictates that the earliest humans in the Americas followed an ice-free corridor down the center of the continent, or potentially migrated down the Pacific coast. Michigan, having been covered by the massive Laurentide ice sheet until relatively late, was believed to be populated by later waves of migration. However, specific findings push the date of human presence in the Great Lakes region earlier than expected, sometimes coinciding with or even potentially predating the established Clovis culture benchmark, see 13,500 years ago. This is the pre-Clovis anomaly. While no definitive consensus-level pre-Clovis site has been fully authenticated in Michigan, the occasional discovery of unusual, non-fluted, and stylistically archaic projectile points in deep,
undisturbed context suggests a lingering possibility of earlier occupation. Science is currently limited by the difficulty of dating non-organic material and the need for absolute certainty before fundamentally altering the deep history of the continent. One specific and recurrent mystery lies in the topology of certain Paleoindian sites themselves. For example, some sites exhibit extremely high concentrations of specific stone types or unique tool assemblages that do not easily match surrounding cultural complexes. The Fisher site in the Saginaw Valley, a massive encampment, yielded thousands of artifacts that showcase the immense organization and resource utilization of these early people. Yet the exact social structure and duration of their occupation remain debated. Were these transient hunting camps or fixed, seasonally occupied bases that allowed for the construction of sophisticated structures like the submerged features we discussed earlier? The size and richness of some of these early sites demand an explanation for the economic and social capacity required to sustain such a large presence in a post-glacial, rapidly changing environment. Science can inventory the tools, but it cannot fully map the intricate social ecology of these 10,000-year-old communities. Adding to the enigma are the cryptic, non-utilitarian artifacts sometimes found in early contexts. These include small, carefully carved pieces of bone or stone that appear to have symbolic rather than practical purpose. Such finds are rare and highly controversial because they are easily dismissed as natural formations or later intrusions. Yet, if genuine, these artifacts would provide the earliest evidence of Paleo-Indian symbolic expression in art in Michigan. This directly ties back to the mastodon carving at Grand Traverse Bay. If Paleo-Indians were carving immense stone structures, they were undoubtedly capable of creating smaller, symbolic items. The scientific community often maintains a very high bar for accepting symbolic art from this era, demanding definitive association with datable organic material, a criterion that is almost never met in these ancient, acidic Michigan soils. Thus, the evidence for early art and symbolism remains fragmented, leaving a huge gap in our understanding of the cultural mind of the region's first human inhabitants. Finally, the study of lithic sourcing, tracking the origins of the stone used for tools, present the mystery of ancient mobility and trade. Scientists can analyze the chemical composition of chert and flint to determine its geological source. Analysis of Paleo-Indian tools in Michigan revealed that the stone often came from distant quarries, sometimes hundreds of miles away, crossing state and potentially international boundaries, like the well-known source areas in Ohio or Ontario. This confirms the existence of incredibly vast and sustained long-distance travel and trade networks among the earliest inhabitants. The unsolved mystery is the mechanism and social structure that supported this trade. Were these materials exchanged through down-the-line reciprocity, where objects moved slowly from one group to the next, or were there organized long-distance expeditions undertaken by specialized travelers? The existence of such immense networks challenges the simplistic view of isolated, small, nomadic groups, suggesting a more interconnected, complex Paleo-Indian highway system across the glaciated landscape of North America, the full scope of which is yet to be revealed. These cryptic artifacts and sites force science to consider a more complex, earlier, and culturally richer vision of Michigan's deep history. They are the few surviving clues that suggest that the earliest peoples were not just focused on survival, but on culture, trade, and symbolic expression, all while adapting to the profound, continuous geological and climatic upheaval of the post-Ice Age world.
We have navigated through 10,000 words of submerged megaliths, vanished copper empires, cryptic carvings, and geological riddles that define Michigan's ancient, unsolved history. From the depths of Grand Traverse Bay, where the mastodon-etched stones challenge the timeline of global monumental architecture, to the massive, silent pits of the Keweenaw Peninsula,
Where hundreds of thousands of tons of copper seemingly vanished, Michigan presents a powerful counter-narrative to the standard American archaeological textbook. These mysteries persist, not because scientists have ignored them, but because the evidence is often obscured, ambiguous, or lies beyond the reach of current standard research funding and technology. The final part of this discussion focuses on why these mysteries remain unsolved and what the future holds for definitively explaining Michigan's deep time. The core reason why science can't fully explain these anomalies is the triple challenge of water, weathering, and lack of organic material. The Great Lakes, while preserving sites in a state of low oxygen suspension, make access tremendously difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. You cannot simply walk to the Lake Michigan Stonehenge and conduct an easy excavation. It requires specialized marine archaeology, submersibles, ROV, and deep-sea geological mapping. Similarly, on land, the acidic soils and dramatic seasonal changes rapidly degrade organic material, meaning that carbon dating, the archaeologist's most trusted tool, is often unavailable. Without datable material tied directly to the construction of a stone wall, an effigy mound, or a copper pit, the anomaly remains locked in the ambiguous space between natural geological fluke and intentional human engineering. The science is sound, but the physical evidence necessary to cross the threshold of proof is simply hard to come by. Furthermore, the history of archaeological credibility in Michigan, scarred by the extensive Michigan relics hoax, has fostered a necessary but sometimes overly cautious skepticism within the established scientific community. Every unusual find, from an alleged solar alignment to an unclassified stone tool, is subjected to intense scrutiny to prevent a repeat of past fraud. While this rigor is essential for maintaining academic integrity, it can slow the acceptance of genuine paradigm-shifting discoveries. It often means that funding and effort are prioritized for safer sites with established timelines, while the most intriguing and challenging anomalies are relegated to the status of fringe research, awaiting a definitive breakthrough or a massive influx of dedicated resources. The future explanation of these mysteries hinges on overcoming this funding gap and mobilizing large-scale multidisciplinary projects. The path towards solving these riddles lies in the application of cutting-edge, non-invasive technology. The age of digging based solely on educated guesswork is fading. Future research in Michigan will increasingly rely on tools like ground-penetrating radar, GPR, to map subsurface structures without disturbing them, helping to differentiate between a natural esker and a human-built effigy mound. Light art floating over Michigan's vast forest is already starting to reveal subtle linear and geometric features hidden beneath the dense tree canopy, potentially uncovering hundreds of unrecorded stone alignments or earthworks. For the submerged sites, advancements in AUV mapping and photogrammetry will allow researchers to create highly detailed three-dimensional models of the Lake Michigan Stonehenge and the Caribou Drive Lanes, permitting in-depth analysis of stone placement and carving marks from the comfort of a laboratory. Crucially, the solutions must also be sought through deep collaboration with indigenous communities. The knowledge held by the Anishinaabe and other descendant nations, knowledge passed down through oral traditions and spiritual practices, offers a vital interpretive lens that empirical science alone lacks. Explaining the purpose of the petroglyphs or the cosmology behind the earthworks requires linking the physical facts, the carving technique, the stone type, with the cultural meaning, the spiritual narrative, the purpose. The future of Michigan archaeology is inherently collaborative, integrating indigenous traditional knowledge with Western scientific methods to paint a complete picture of the past. Ultimately, these unsolved mysteries are not failures of science. They are opportunities for discovery. They demonstrate that Michigan's history is deeper, its ancient inhabitants were more resourceful, and their scale of operations from the massive copper mines to the submerged hunting complexes was far grander than previously conceived. The mastodon in the stone, the silent copper pits, and the submerged causeways are all waiting for the convergence of technology, funding, and collaboration to finally break the silence of the past. When they do, Michigan's ancient history will not just be rewritten, it will be dramatically expanded. The answer is out there, perhaps just a few feet deeper beneath the lake, or a single careful radar sweep away.